What is up, Tube users, and welcome back to another installment of Overwatch 2 Heroes, an in-depth guide. Today, we're going to be taking a look at another tank, and probably my favorite in terms of the lore surrounding this hero, Sigma. Now, let's jump right into things. Sigma's primary fire is hyperspheres. These are two spheres that are fired back to back and deal 55 damage on direct hit and 9 to 30 splash damage to enemies within a 3 meter radius of their explosion. These projectiles will travel about 22 meters before automatically exploding or when an enemy is hit by the projectile. Sigma will always fire two spheres, so there's no need to ever worry about reloading, as it is done automatically after the shots are fired. It does take 1.5 seconds for the hyperspheres to recharge and fire again, however. A couple of things to note about this primary fire is the splash damage can deal self-damage if Sigma is too close, but it will deal less damage to himself than it would to enemies at 2.25 to 7.5 damage to Sigma. Another important thing to note is hyperspheres cannot headshot enemies. Now, let's move on to Sigma's secondary fire. Sigma's secondary fire is Experimental Barrier. This is a barrier that is projected in front of Sigma and can move forward from where Sigma is looking indefinitely. The barrier can be recalled at any time by pressing the ability button again. If it is recalled before it's destroyed, the cooldown to use it again is 2 seconds. Otherwise, if the barrier is destroyed, it goes on a 5-second cooldown. The barrier itself has 700 HP and will heal 100 HP per second after being recalled for 2 seconds. Few key things about this ability is Sigma cannot use other abilities while projecting it, but he can use other abilities when recalling it. The barrier will also immediately return to Sigma if he is eliminated or hacked by an enemy Sombra. Now, let's talk about Sigma's defensive abilities. Sigma's first ability is Kinetic Grasp. This ability acts similarly to D.Va's Defense Matrix in that it absorbs all incoming projectiles for 2 seconds. 60% of the damage absorbed by this ability is turned into overhealth for Sigma, up to a maximum of 400 overhealth. The area for this ability is roughly a rectangular shape around Sigma's body, and it extends in front of him by 3 meters. This ability can only be cancelled by Sigma if he uses his second ability or his ultimate, but if he does cancel this ability, the overhealth will also be cancelled. Which, speaking of, let's dive into Sigma's next ability. Sigma's second ability is Accretion. For this ability, Sigma gathers debris on the ground for just over half a second and hurls it at a target. It does 40 damage on direct hit and 12 to 40 splash damage to enemies within a 2.5 meter radius of the explosion. During the cast of this ability, Sigma receives a minus 75% movement speed penalty. If Sigma hits an enemy directly, they are stunned for just over 1 second. This ability can also inflict self-damage to Sigma if he's in the splash damage range, but he only receives half damage at 6 to 20 damage at maximum. Now, let's take a look at Sigma's ultimate ability. Sigma's ultimate ability is Graphitic Flux. This ultimate ability lifts up enemies caught within its 8 meter radius and deals 50 damage to them, suspends them in air for 2 seconds, and then slams them back down after 0.5 seconds, dealing 50% of their max HP. This ultimate alone won't be able to kill any heroes that are at max HP, unfortunately. However, Sigma can use his primary fire to deal damage to enemies caught in the suspension for 2 seconds before they are slammed down. Upon activating this ability, there is a 1 second delay where enemies can see the targeted location and try to escape if they're caught in it. This ability also ignores all enemy barriers and objects such as turrets, mines, and teleporters, to name a few. The initial lift damage can be boosted by things such as Mercy Boost or Ana's Nano Boost, but the slam damage cannot be boosted. While enemies are suspended, they cannot use any movement abilities. Now that we've gone over all of Sigma's abilities, let's talk about heroes that counter and are countered by Sigma. Sigma is a poke tank in that he mainly pokes at enemies with his primary fire. Because his primary fire being able to deal decent damage from range and his projected barrier being able to extend for even longer ranges, Sigma definitely excels at maps with long lines of sight. He's also, in my opinion, one of the most balanced heroes in the game, providing great offensive and defensive capabilities without feeling overpowered or underpowered. With that being said, a good tank matchup for Sigma would be against a Roadhog. Roadhog is most effective up close, which he can pull enemies to with his chain hook. Sigma can counter this pull by using his projected barrier, granted that the barrier is not already out on the battlefield. Roadhog's main defense also is take a breather, which allows him to heal a significant amount. Sigma is able to counter this fairly easily with his accretion since Roadhog is such a big target. As for a DPS hero Sigma plays well against, I'm going to go with Widowmaker. Widowmaker relies a lot on long lines of sight to be effective. With Sigma's projected barrier being able to move indefinitely, Sigma can easily block those lines of sight where Widowmaker is located. And finally, for a support hero Sigma plays well against, I'm going to go with Ana. Ana is another hero that plays well in longer lines of sight to support her allies. And again, because of Sigma's projected barrier, he can effectively block those lines of sight. Plus, Sigma can use Kinetic Grasp to both eat Ana's Anti-Nade and Sleep Dart if timed properly. Now, let's move on to heroes that counter Sigma. Sigma lacks any sort of movement ability, which can be a problem if he's out of position. A tank hero that Sigma can struggle against is Orisa. Orisa has a few annoying things in her kit that make it difficult for Sigma. Firstly, her Javelin can pass through and cancel Sigma's Kinetic Grasp. And secondly, her Fortify can nullify both Sigma's Accretion and his Graphitic Flux ultimate if she's caught. Both those things combined can make it difficult for Sigma to play against Orisa. As for a DPS hero who plays well against Sigma, I'm going to go with Symmetra. As I've talked about before, with Sigma having a lot of shields with a 700 HP barrier and 200 shield health, Symmetra can eat through that with her beam primary fire and turrets. Plus, because her primary fire is beam damage, it is not affected by Sigma's Kinetic Grasp. This matchup all around does not bode well for Sigma. Finally, a support hero that Sigma struggles against is Baptiste. Bap can play the range game fairly well against Sigma and is able to maneuver around his projectile barrier with ease, thanks to his jump boost. Plus, his immortality field is pretty much the same radius as Sigma's Graphitic Flux, allowing allies caught in the Graphitic Flux to not die when slain down. Now that we've gone over counters, let's talk about some tips and tricks for Sigma. The key thing to note about when using his ultimate ability is that it can be countered by things such as Ana's Sleep Dart, Roadhog's Chain Hook, or really any sort of stun that the enemy team has. So a way to protect yourself from these abilities is to use your projected barrier upwards to where you want to fly around in and just kind of play around your shield, so that way you're protected by any sort of counters that the enemy team would have. The key thing you want to do when playing Sigma is to definitely play around lines of sight. You can use your projected barrier to extend those lines of sight, but since he has such a slow rate of fire, only being able to fire 2 spheres every 1.5 seconds, you really want to be just poking out to fire 2 spheres and then going back behind cover to reload, as it were. As for Sigma's ultimate ability also, you want to try and target tanks with it as much as possible because it does the slam does 50% of their max HP, you want to catch tanks in that as much as possible because they have the most health, so it's going to be doing a lot of damage to them if you catch them in that slam. And for the most part, you want to try and recall your shield before it is fully destroyed, and when it's recalled, use your kinetic grasp to just defend yourself for those 2 seconds, because during that time your projected barrier will regain some of the health, and that way you can bring it back quicker than you would normally if it was destroyed. That's all I have for today. Remember to leave a like, comment any other tips and tricks you have for Sigma, and make sure to subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
That rhythm.